name is Ryan Cam, and welcome back to the 1999 Project. No two-parters, no anything of that sort. The Baby Geniuses is out of my system, and it's back to business as usual. So we've got three movies to cover. Let's get into it. Starting off with a curiosity, to say the least. A kind of bad curiosity. It's the Rankin Bass King and I.
Of The King and I,
etc.
The King and I was directed by Richard Rich, that is the man's name, and it was produced by Rankin Bass. I'm sure if we're animation fans, we all know who they are. And this is an animated retelling of the musical of the same name created by Richard Rogers and Oscar Hammerstein II. It tells the story of an English widow who travels to Siam to teach the ways of Britain to the Siamese people. And while she is there as a tutor, she falls in love with the king. This is a musical that I have little knowledge of, and I'd like to think of myself as someone who knows a lot about musicals. There are not that many musicals that I don't know, but The King and I is one of those definitive blind spots where I'm like, yeah, that was a thing, wasn't it? And Rodgers and Hammerstein were no slouches. They really were the kings of musicals for a while, like Oklahoma, State Fair, Carousel, and that's literally just naming some off the top of my head. And I heard that this particular adaptation of The King and I had a bit of a reputation, so much so that it got the Nostalgia Critic treatment, just as Nostalgia Critic was coming back after his hiatus and the demo reel days. We don't talk about the demo reel days. And I can definitely see why this movie got the Nostalgia Critic treatment, because it's not great. It's not the worst, but there's just a lot about this movie that is just not aged the best. The best part of the movie was the main woman, played by Miranda Richardson. Miranda Richardson is at the very least trying, and she does do a good rendition of Getting to Know You, like that song. She does do an admirable job with that. She is the best part. The rest of the movie is just a bunch of nothing happening, really. The animation, some of it looks good, but the rest of it just looks not good. This was in that weird era of animation where people were discovering CGI, and so there was a real need to mix and match with regular hand-drawn and CGI, when in reality they go together like chalk and cheese in most cases. So they needed to pick a lane, and Rankin Bass didn't choose a lane, and so a lot of the CGI in this movie looks pretty terrible. It also doesn't really help things that clearly Rankin Bass watched Aladdin when preparing for this, because there is a lot of Aladdin, not references, but let's just say beats picked up from that one. The villain of this movie is pretty much Jafar, but without anything that made Jafar charismatic. And honestly, at the end of the day, this is a movie that is honestly pretty forgettable. Again, it's not absolutely terrible. It's not even the worst animated movie I've ever seen. I mean, like, we got movies like Food Fight for that. No, this is at the very least competent. But competent is about the best thing that I can describe it. And it's strange too, because 99 would be a surprisingly good year for animation. Just off the top of my head, we get the triple threat of Tarzan, The Iron Giant, and Toy Story 2, the best Pixar movie. And yes, I know what I said, and I'm sticking to it. So 99 was an excellent year for animation. And then there's The King and I, bringing up the rear. But yeah, this one was not great. But let's move on to a movie that has high ambitions but is undercut by tonal shifts that'll give you a whiplash. It's Ravenous.
he was licking me! Ravenous.
Ravenous was directed by Antonia Bird, and it starred Guy Pearce, Jeffrey Jones, Neil McDonough, among others. And it tells the story of a disgraced Union Army captain, played by Pierce. He is disgraced in the sense that he got a medal for a heroic deed. However, he kind of wussed out of said. Basically, he got the awards he did basically on accident. And so, as punishment, he is sent to the complete ass end of California. I know, like, I need to be specific, but specifically a camp, like, in the part of California that no one wants to go to. However, there is a rumor going around that the place is crawling with cannibals, man. And so he, and along with the others in this fort, go and investigate to grisly results. This was a movie that I had always heard of and had wanted to see for ages, because I'm big into horror now, so of course. But the movie has a pretty good cast, including, among other people, Guy Pearce, Robert Carlyle, David Arquette, who would next year become WCW World Champion, more on that at a later date, and Jeffrey Jones, who was the Emperor of Austria in Amadeus and the principal in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So a pretty solid cast, a horror movie, and for the most part, I did like this one. However, my main problem, and I'll just address it here, is that this movie tries to be a horror comedy and it doesn't really work. I feel like the angle of Guy Pearce's character basically being awarded this distinction because of an accident, I feel like could be intriguing. However, I don't think they really go about doing it in a way that is satisfying. They go about this very absurdist style of humor, and I was just sitting there thinking to myself, was this entirely necessary? I mean, you're trying to make cannibalism funny almost. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but throughout this movie, I was just sitting there thinking to myself, why? Like, I'm not asking for Wreck or like Buried. I'm not asking for like a contained thriller here. But if you're billing yourself as horror or as a horror comedy, then there are better horror comedies out there, like Evil Dead 2. There you go. But like it just feels like horror's here, comedies here, and they're just doing this for an hour 45 or an hour 41, I guess. When the movie leans into its more horror side, that's when it really shines. Guy Pearce is pretty good. Jeffrey Jones is good as well. Really, really when the horror side comes out, that's when the movie shines. A lot of the stuff is practical, and yeah, it's pretty gruesome. There are several shots where just Guy Pearce is just caked in blood, and I'm just like, bro, that must be miserable for you. And at the end of the day, I'm going to give this a good rating because tonal problems aside, this is still a well made movie, and I admire the ambition more than the execution, if that makes any sense at all. I recommend hunting it down just for a one off watch. But let's close things out for this week by taking a look at a movie that I did not expect to like as much as I did, but I ended up really liking it. It's called True Crime.
From Academy Award-winning director Clint Eastwood.
Brother Beecham, let me tell you of the law.
True Crime.
True Crime was directed by Clint Eastwood. It also stars him, as well as James Woods, Dennis Leary, Isaiah Washington, and Lisa Gay Hamilton, among others. And it tells the story of a reporter, played by Eastwood, who is assigned to write up the final piece on a very long and winding criminal case that involves murder. To make the long story short, a character played by Isaiah Washington killed a woman in a convenience store. And so he is basically going to go the way of John Coffey in The Green Mile at the end of this night. However, the more that Eastwood's character looks into the case, he quickly begins to realize that not everyone is being super honest about this case. And so it is up to him to find out and stave off the execution before an innocent man gets shuffled off this mortal coil for the wrong reason. I consider myself a fan of Clint Eastwood, both as an actor and as a director. He's had some duds, of course. What director hasn't? But the man is still going strong all these years later, and God forbid this happens soon, but when he eventually dies, it's going to be a sad day because he is someone who will never see his like again, both as an actor and as a director. So whenever I find a new Eastwood thing, I always go out of my way to see it and try and embrace it. And thankfully, with the case of True Crime, this is honestly a very solid little movie. It's not outright perfect. I do have an issue with it, but overall, I thought this movie was riveting. This movie feels like a play, and I mean that as a compliment. Pretty much most of this movie involves Eastwood going to a person and talking to them. It's very dialogue heavy. This isn't really an action movie per se. It feels very much, like I said, like a play. But I kind of liked that. I liked how dialogue heavy it was. Your mileage is going to vary. It's not a Dirty Harry movie. It's very much Eastwood going to a guy saying, "You said this on this date," and then the guy going, "I don't want to talk about it," for about 2 hours. For some, this will be tiresome, but I enjoyed it. This is mostly the Clint Eastwood show, and he does a very good job. This cast is still pretty good as well. James Woods is pretty good as the newspaper's editor. Dennis Leary is kind of wasted in his role as Eastwood's colleague, but they do have some good backs and forths. And Isaiah Washington does a good job. He has a heartbreaking scene in the prison with his wife, played by Lisa Gay Hamilton from Star Trek First Contact, and their daughter. That will rip your heart out. Dennis Leary's character is wasted in this movie because they give him an angle where Eastwood's character is sleeping with Leary's character's wife on the side. And I don't feel like that was entirely necessary. I feel like it was done because to say like this reporter is not a good guy, but he's trying to do a good thing. I feel like that's fine and all, but you didn't have to do that plot line or at least explore it further. I don't know. They have this subdued conversation in the storage closet, and it's like this weird acceptance of it. I'm like, why was this even a thing in the first place? I don't understand this decision. Overall, at the end of the day, I'm going to give this a great rating. You may think I'm being generous, and I feel like I may be slightly generous, but I found this movie to be honestly pretty riveting. There is a lot going on here, and most of it works. This is a severely underrated movie from Clint Eastwood, and I recommend you all check it out. What did you all think of any of the movies I've talked about? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to read what you have to say. My name is Ryan Cam, and I'll see you in the next one.